Yeah.
Hey, we're finally here. This review has been long overdue. I mean, honestly, I should have been doing this last year if it weren't for the SAG-AFTRA strike and everything else in between, but we are finally getting the chance to talk about Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2. Obviously, picking right back off where the first one from 2021 left off, following Timothée Chalamet as Paul Atreides as he joins the Fremen on Arrakis against their fight against the House Harkonnen, and of course, so much intrigue, so much more romance. Everything you can think of was built up in the last movie into this one. I mean, the cast is even bigger. You got names like Florence Pugh, Christopher Walken, Austin Butler, Léa Seydoux, amongst many others joining this cast. And as you may have remembered, if you saw my review back at the beginning of 2022, I did it for the Best Picture nominees that year. And I really like the first Dune, but one of my biggest problems with it, no pun intended, it's a bit dry. And I mean that in regards to not the sand, but more so the characters and the story itself, because really I think where that film excelled was in the politics and the world building more than anything, but I felt an emotional detachment from the story and characters, at least in regards that I couldn't fully embrace it, because technically speaking, it was a marvel. It is still a huge snub to this day that Denis Villeneuve did not get nominated for the first Dune, and I really don't see that being the case at all with the second, because let me put it this way. When I think of the best filmmaking of all time, not even from a directorial standpoint, but that goes hand in hand, you could say, I think of films like Gone with the Wind. I think of Citizen Kane. I think of Ben-Hur from 1959. I think of Lawrence of Arabia. I think of 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I think of Barry Lyndon. And when I say that Dune Part 2 deserves to be amongst those films as some of the finest filmmaking to ever exist, you know that I do not say that lightly. At all. Dune Part 2 while I'm not saying it is the best film from top to bottom that has come out in my lifetime, I certainly think from a filmmaking standpoint it is. The filmmaking here is unreal. I do not even know how Denis Villeneuve pulled this off, because I was saying, if you remember from my most anticipated movies of this year, if you remember that video, this was my number one, and I really said that he was going to go even further and above and beyond for this one, and what really could have been a masterpiece of a film. And before I get into all of that and what my definitive thoughts on the film are, I think what I can tell you is that from a technical level, this blows the first one out of the water. I mean, just the cinematography here is so unbelievably innovative by Greg Fraser. Literally every single shot of this movie is memorable. And I can't think of many movies that is the case. And it is so vast and epic in scope. I heard it was like shot on IMAX digital and then converted to 35mm. And it really does feel very, very smooth. And yet every single shot was so painstakingly composed. I mean, the fact that even Greg Fraser described the process of deciding to shoot on IMAX digital and then converting it to 35mm is really, really a very specific choice from a cinematography standpoint, and I think it's absolutely stunning. I mean, this is one of the greatest looking movies of all time. I'd probably throw it in the top 10 best shot films in the history of cinema. I mean, I am not joking when I say this. And I really think that this is a runaway winner for the Best Cinematography Oscar next year. And quite frankly, in any year. Oppenheimer wouldn't have had a chance if it was going up against this, to be quite honest. And I think it's definitely going to get him his second Academy Award. But also, everything in this movie, I think, I really don't see how anything else can win in the technical categories next year, and I really do not see how anything can win Best Picture over this. Dune Part 2 is everything that a sequel should be. It pushes the story forward. It brings the characters to much more darker, emotional heights. It has so much more intrigue, so many moving power dynamics, so much on display, and it never loses focus for a single second of its almost 3-hour runtime. And it is quite honestly unbelievable because every single second of this film I was absolutely riveted, mainly because of the visuals, but the fact that the story was so intriguing as well really bolstered it to another level. And the action sequences, I mean, not to get into spoilers or anything, but this movie starts off on an action sequence, and it's absolutely stunning and visceral and everything you'd want out of an action sequence. And then as the movie goes along, they just keep getting better and better. And I'm like, how is this all coming together in such a fully realized and amazing manner? I mean, I don't know what Denis Villeneuve did. I mean, you have to imagine that the pre-production for this film was absolutely insane. And yet again, I like to bring up the comparisons of Ben-Hur and Lawrence of Arabia, which are two of my favorite movies of all time. And I think it really is a huge compliment I'm even mentioning them. And it isn't because, oh, they're in the desert or whatever. Well, okay, maybe just a little bit. But don't tell anyone. And I think the thing, though, that really makes me warrant these comparisons is because of the scope of every single frame of this movie. There is just some shots, especially seeing this in IMAX, like, please go see this in IMAX. You can go see it in a smaller theater after if you want to, but it is going to pale in comparison to seeing this on the largest screen possible, whether it be from an audio standpoint as well. I mean, you really feel like your seat is shaking when you're in the theater with those huge surround sound systems all around you, just pulsating through the rest of the room. It is magnificent what is achieved yet again from top to bottom in this film. And the production design is unbelievable too. I'm kind of astonished how they were able to build these sets because they're so fully formed and realized that it feels like it was shot on one of the big sound stages that the studios had in the 50s. You know what I mean? Yet again, a la Ben-Hur. But I really think that this is easily going to win the production design Oscar, as I think it's some of the most innovative that I've ever seen in any movie, and it really brings this already fully realized world to even more life. And yet again, the whole sequence on Harkonnen, there's this whole Colosseum sequence, I'm sure you've seen in the trailers, it's all shot in black and white, or it seems that way, but I heard that they shot it in UV. Just because the way the light was filtered or something. But it's unbelievably stunning how that sequence plays out and the way they play between the contrast in black and white and color. I've never seen it in any movie. I've never seen anything like it, I should say. And I legitimately think it's an incredible achievement. Just the way the frame is filled to the brim with extras and detail, it is unbelievable because it's so well refined. You know, yet again, to bring up another movie I already mentioned, Gone with the Wind. There are shots in this movie that kind of remind me of that famous shot when Scarlett's going through the square and all the soldiers are laying on the ground, right? Like, I'm not saying that there's anything in this movie quite like that, but there's many moments from a cinematography standpoint that stand out in that sense. I'm going to be talking about the cinematography of this movie for like 5 minutes of this review or more, but I really cannot stress enough how well made this film is. But to get into the story as well, it is unbelievable. I mean, yet again, just from the relationship between Paul Atreides and Shani, of course played by Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya respectively, I know some people might have wanted a little bit more there, but I thought they worked so great together. They had a beautiful chemistry, and I think their dynamic is what really adds the most emotional gravitas to this movie. And yet again, it's the dynamic between the two of them and how that evolves throughout the course of the story, and certainly by the end, it really brings the movie up in so many ways that I think is really kind of incredible. But that's not even the main focus, because of course you have Rebecca Ferguson back as his mother, and my goodness, I think she might be the standout of this entire cast. I don't know if anyone's going to get nominated for this movie, but I think if they had to pick anyone, I think Rebecca Ferguson would be the one. I think her character, besides maybe Paul Atreides, has the most interesting and compelling arc of this entire movie, and there's so many amazing surprises if you haven't read the Frank Herbert novel that I think they get into in the story, especially with her character, that I was just unbelievably and profoundly riveted by. And of course, to talk about some other returning cast members, Javier Bardem as Stilgar really brings a great sense of comic relief to this movie, and also the dynamic he has between Paul is really something interesting, because he is very much a true believer amongst the Fremen in regards to their religion, and he kind of is sussing Paul out. It's like, is he really the one, you know? And I think the way that dynamic evolves by the end of the movie, yet again, causes for some of the most amazing drama and amazingly written drama in this entire thing. Josh Brolin coming back as Gurney is also amazing, and I think he serves an even greater purpose to the story, especially in the way he's interacting with Paul. Everything revolves around Paul, of course, but I think the supporting characters are what really bolster this to another level. And of course, I have to talk about Timothée Chalamet as Paul Atreides in this, in what I believe to be one of his finest performances to date, certainly as this character. Yeah, he really ups the ante on this one this time around, and you get a lot more to latch onto with Paul, because Paul is essentially a character who's torn between wanting to help these people, but also the sort of position that he's kind of posited by many of them, especially the really religious members of the Fremen. And then of course you have another subsection who's like, no, he's not some prophet or messiah, and they kind of like disavow him, and you get this amazing conflict between these two sides of these people, and Paul finds himself in the middle of that, and that really is, I think, the heart of the story. And it brings up so many thought-provoking points about how religion is often used to control people in a certain sense, and how getting caught in the middle of that, and the power that comes from that, when people see you in a certain light, it really creates some of the most intriguing and thought-compelling drama I've seen in a movie in a long time. And I think that's why the reason Dune Part 2 works so well. Yet again, you had all the great build-up from Part 1, and it just brought all the way home in this movie. And I think if Timothée Chalamet didn't work in the role of Paul Atreides, I don't think the story would have worked as well. But Zendaya is equally effective as Shani, because in the other movie she was just kind of crammed in there right at the end, but she really is the character I think you feel the most for throughout this entire story. Yet again, I think the most human drama is found through her, and I think she's the one you certainly relate to the most throughout the course of the story, and I just think she's absolutely fantastic in this, really. And yet again, since she's kind of more on the newer end of the cast, even though she was in the second one briefly, we got to talk about the new members of the cast. Of course, Florence Pugh coming in, pretty great, though she doesn't get a whole lot to do in this one, though I think that they might be setting up more if they do Dune Messiah, which I don't know how they couldn't after this film. And of course, Christopher Walken as the Emperor. Yeah, I mean, a very unexpected casting choice for sure, but I think this is some of the most interesting work he's done in a long time. Though I think one line delivery I wasn't sure on, not really a criticism, it's just a nitpick, if you have to look for anything in this movie to nitpick. And I think his role in the story is going to be very interesting going forward. And of course I have to mention Austin Butler as Feyd-Rautha in this, who is such a menacing presence in this movie. As soon as he shows up, he's absolutely terrifying and psychotic in all the best ways that you'd want a villain to be. Every second he's on screen, he's absolutely compelling. Is he going to get an Oscar nomination for this? I don't know. I mean, it's too early to say, but I think his work from an acting standpoint is super impressive. He really shows that he is such a versatile actor. I mean, if Elvis didn't tell you that, I think this certainly will. And he's really channeling Stellan Skarsgård here, who of course is Baron von Harkonnen, his uncle. And I think, yet again, absolute standout to this movie, an amazing, amazing casting choice, I think was absolutely key to this movie's success. And I could go on. Léa Seydoux shows up in a short period of the film, and I'm really interested to see what they do with her character going forward. But legitimately speaking, I mean, there's not really a weak link overall in this entire cast. Though I will say, doesn't really take down the movie at all for me, but Dave Bautista's character isn't really given a whole lot to do, and he just yells a lot. So I was okay with it, but I know a lot of other people have been criticizing that element of the film. I kind of understand, but I didn't mind it too much. I just think the story around everything else is so captivating that stuff like that didn't really bother me, because I think at this film's best, it really dives so much into the mythology of this world, and the evolving escalation of the story is really what makes Dune Part 2 so incredible. And yet again, I think this movie has some of the most jaw-dropping action sequences, character moments that you're ever going to see in, quite honestly, any movie. I mean, this movie is fucking amazing. I don't really know what else I can say. I'm trying to think, because I'm sure that there's a lot that still has... Oh, Hans Zimmer's score. Even better here than in the first. Yet again, I do not know how this cast and crew continuously top themselves. And I can't wait to see what happens when Dune Messiah comes out. But his score is so thematic this time around, especially the theme between Paul and Shani. Really a motif-laden highlight of this film. And yet again, there's so much innovation in the music that's being pushed forward by Zimmer. Of course, in the filmmaking being pushed forward by Greg Fraser and Denis Villeneuve. I mean, there's so many abstract sequences that are so psychedelic and very, very auteuristic. I mean, think of something like 2001. I really think the Kubrick comparison is apt here, especially in the way Denis Villeneuve makes this film. But I really could go on and on about how amazing this film is, and how much they build out this world from the last one in what was already pretty well established. But really, this is everything, like I said, that a sequel should be. I know people have been saying this is Lord of the Rings, the Return of the King of this generation. I take it a step further, and I will say that this is the Empire Strikes Back of this generation. And I think as a film, it's even more well made and just unbelievable to look at. Yet again, I loved every single second of this movie. I legitimately think to myself, it is only March, and I do not know how any movie is going to top this for the rest of the year. Dune Part 2 is an absolute cinematic masterpiece, and of course, it goes without saying that I am going to give it a 10 out of 10. I knew that this was going to happen. I called it. I knew that we should never lose faith in Denis Villeneuve, because he has quite frankly proven himself to be one of the best filmmakers of the past 15 years. But I think he's on his way to be considered one of the greatest filmmakers in the history of cinema. And I think this film further solidifies that. I cannot wait to see what he does next, and I cannot wait to see Dune Messiah, because you know that this movie is going to make gangbusters at the box office. And I absolutely think this story necessitates a third film, and just the way they leave this off, it feels much more self-contained than the first one. I will say though that there might be a scene or so that's kind of thrown in there. Maybe feels a little bit like setup, but yet again it's so visually intriguing from a cinematography standpoint, from a production design standpoint. Yet again, I mean, it's unbelievable what they do here in that regard, but I don't think it really matters, because the whole story just overall is so epic in scope. And yet again, it's one of the greatest movies ever made. And I don't throw that out very often, but I think Dune Part 2 is more than deserving of that type of praise. And yeah, guys, that's my review of Dune Part 2. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I mean, how can you not like this. I mean, if you don't like this, I'm legitimately wondering if there's something wrong with you. I'm sorry. I mean, this is such a stunning achievement, and I think that this is going to be a sci-fi epic in just a film in general that we are going to be talking about as an all-time classic in the years to come. And of course, if you like what I'm doing here, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel. Going to be a lot more reviews like this one, hopefully very soon. But of course, I have to get to some very special videos this week. One that should be dropping on, I believe, the 8th, so stay tuned for that. And also, of course, sooner than later, my top 10 films of 2023. Be on the lookout for it, Oscar night. And yeah, guys, I can't wait to talk to you all soon, and can't wait to bring up this movie many times for the rest of this year and onward. So yeah, guys, until the next video, you guys have yourselves a good one, and we'll talk movies soon.